I decided to indulge in the slightly simpler next step for the midroom, which was making a new bedroom door. This was the last door in the house to replace, and it was actually one of the more nicely made doors, but it didn't match any of the doors that were in the house when we moved in, and it doesn't match any of the doors I've replaced them with since either. Lily was particularly perturbed by the glass in it. It has a very strange exaggerated Flemish pattern to it, rather than just being Flemish. I long ago replaced the thing I hated most about it, which was the utterly unergonomic brass handle that used to be on the door. I replaced it with this nice vintage aluminium one, but that wasn't enough for me to want to keep the rest of the door. The one thing I did appreciate about the door was that it was glass for a reason, and that reason was to let the southern light in through the otherwise windowless space. Not that much light was coming through with a hook on the back of the door, which, while it could have been easily removed, also served as a motivation to just make a new door without a hook. So with the motivations clear, Lily and I agreed to not overthink it, and I designed a new door that was a simple single glass pane constructed in the style of the mid-century door we had rescued from a skip and renovated a couple of years back. I ordered some timber and a new piece of toughened reeded glass, and by chance they both arrived on the same day. It took me a while to pluck up the courage to start work on the door. It's not like I was using particularly expensive wood for this, but I didn't want to do something stupid and waste it all. When I got to work, I started by cutting the mortises. I picked an auger bit that seemed like a good fit for the thickness of the door, then drilled myself a little jig out of some more off-cut hardwood from my front door. Which worked pretty well. I then cheated a little and used the multi-tool as an e-chisel to help me hog out some of the excess between the holes. Then gave my manual chisels a sharpening. I can't stress enough how much I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing with sharpening chisels. Before cutting the mortises down to rectangles. It didn't take that long. A happy hour was spent in the workshop getting them right. The next leap into no turning back was to cut the corresponding tenons on the rails. I did this on my table saw by setting the height of the blade and a stop block on my cross-cutting sled to make sure I cut the tenons the same depth all the way around the rail. Something is not right with my dust collection. I then cut the other face, which I did more gradually as it was so much deeper a cut. I had recently bought a new blade for the table saw, and I didn't realise until I began trying to use it for this job that the blade's kerf was 0.2 of a millimetre thinner than the saw's riving knife, which made this job of cutting the tenons way more stupid than it should have been, as the wood kept binding on the riving knife before the cut was finished. I managed to work around it and persevere, getting the joints looking like they were going to fit, before calling it a night and ordering a new blade. I bought a replacement with a much thicker kerf, picking a DJ Trend blade to overcorrect for the issue. With the new blade installed, I headed out to the workshop to get the mortise and tenon joints fitting nicely. They were a little on the tight side, which was better than being too loose, as it meant that I could sneak up on the fit with a bit of power sanding. And that worked pretty well. It didn't take long before all 6 fitted nicely and I had myself a door. Next was cutting the rebate that the glass was going to sit in. This was easy on the rails, theoretically at least, as it could be done on the table saw. I discovered though that the new saw blade I bought was also not exactly right, as the blade had a slightly smaller diameter than the riving knife, and that ended up leaving a little step in my rebate. That was easy to tidy up with a chisel though. The styles were trickier as the rebate wasn't the full length of the wood. I ended cutting the face surface with my circular saw on a guide rail, which worked okay. And I cut the thinner side the whole way through with the table saw, as it didn't really matter to have the cut on that side. I then saved myself a little bit of effort with the e-chisel again, which was useful to cut the waste out before tidying up with a hand chisel.
It's a rebate.
With the rebates cut, it was pretty much ready to be glued up. My in-laws had got me some sash clamps for my birthday this year, and they were amazing for this job. It's nuts that I've made so many other doors in this house without them. It was my first time using them, so I did a test clamping with them and made sure they sat level, which meant I could minimise any twist in the door when they were glued up. So I went ahead and glued it together. And a couple of days later I returned to the workshop to do the final tidying up of the corners of the rebate. Before I did a test fit with the glass, which to my relief fitted. And what's more, there was no twist in the door compared to before I glued it up.
Oh yeah.
So I was winning all around. The next thing to do was to remove the old door temporarily and bring it down to the workshop to mark it up for size. I was really pleased that I could just avoid the knot in one of the edges of the door frame I'd built by just trimming the door to size.
That can work out much better.
So I mocked it all up and trimmed it with the circular saw again, which made it feel so much more doory. Cutting the door down betrayed my biggest failure with the project, which is that way back when I was drilling out the mortises, I completely drilled them way too deep.
Oh,
A real embarrassment,
so embarrassing.
even if the plan was always to paint the door. So I blew all the dust out and loaded the holes up with filler, which salvaged the project adequately.
Actually looking really quite nice now.
I quite like the aluminium hinges that the old door was on, so I transferred the hinge mortises when I was marking up the door for trimming it down. And I got those slots routed out and chiselled too, ready for later. The door was looking really surprisingly nice at this point. It almost felt like it would be a shame to paint it, but that was the order for the day, so I put some knotting over the knots and got on with it. 3 coats of undercoat was enough to block out the knotting, and it was ready for a pair of coats of gloss, which looked really good. Then it was all I could do to leave the paint alone to dry for a bit before attempting to move on to the other side. A couple of days later I set about finding some timber to make the beading that holds the glass in. I didn't have to look far on my shelves to get some that was already the right thickness. And by joy of table saw, I milled it down to the right width as well. I then dropped the glass back into the door and began cutting the mitres to hold the beading in place, which went really well. It's nice when things come out nice and square. I gave the rebate a final clean out, then ran a bead of glazing silicone around all the edges before installing the beading for the final time. My friend Tom suggested I got myself some nail punches after he watched my video about the front door, and they were a great shout. It made the hammering next to glass experience way less stressful. So with the door finally assembled, it was time to paint the beaded side as well. It took another couple of days to work through all the coats, but finally I did get it all finished. And I had a disappointing time trying to peel all the masking tape off the glass. While the paint was drying, I took the opportunity to fit the new light fixture Lily picked out for the midroom. I had to swap the cable from the attic out after all, as this fixture needed grounding. But it went really well.
That's nice.
Yeah, that's alright. That's kind of cool.
That's great.
And I was pleased that it looked less hyper-modern than I expected once it was installed. My patience for leaving the paint to dry wore thin, and I returned to the workshop to fit the hardware to the new door. I went into this with such confidence, firstly drilling the hole for the handle pin, which went well, then drilling out the mortise for the latch to slot into, which quickly became needlessly stressful. I didn't quite appreciate how deep the latch was, and I came about as close to ruining the entire door as I could have, without actually ruining it, as the point of the auger bit came alarmingly close to hitting the glass. It took me a moment to figure out what to do about this. The solution I ended up coming up with was to use a hole saw to get it a little bit deeper and then use a chisel to scrape out the excess. I'm so relieved I got it to work. Meanwhile, I gave the old aluminium hinges a good scrubbing with some paint stripper and wire wool, which did a perfectly acceptable job of restoring them, so I got them fitted, and finally added my nice old handles to the latch. The whole faff with the latch made me wonder why I didn't pre-cut that when I did the hinge slots, before I even assembled the door. Ah well, a lesson learned for next time. It was finally ready to hang, and gladly that was really easy as everything was just transferred from the old door. It's a job well done in the end. I feel like so many of the jobs I do around the house result in what I struggle to articulate as a feeling of zero. But when I'm done, they never seem to feel like a huge quality of life improvement, so much as a correction to how it always should have been. This door is a prime example of that feeling. Rather than the old door looking like it was out of place, this new door just looks like it was always there. And not something I just spent the past couple of weeks building from scratch. And in the next video I really will be building the new closet for the midroom. Thanks for watching this.